The debris field stretched across space like a graveyard of broken dreams. Twisted metal pieces floated in the dark void, remnants of what had once been the human colony ship Aurora's Hope. The massive vessel had tried to escape the war zone 3 months ago, but the Kragnath Empire had caught up with it. Now only scattered wreckage remained. Commander Zethkar moved through the debris with practiced ease. His 12-foot frame was encased in biomechanical armor that made him look like a walking nightmare. Red optical sensors glowed from his helmet as he searched through the floating junk. His people, the Kragnath, were born warriors. They lived for battle and conquest. To them, humans were nothing more than soft, weak creatures who deserved whatever fate the universe handed them. The salvage mission was routine work. Zethkar's superiors wanted him to find any useful technology before other scavengers arrived. Human ships sometimes carried valuable equipment that could be stripped and sold. It was boring work for a warrior of his rank, but orders were orders. His sensors beeped softly as they detected something interesting. A cargo pod floated about 50 meters away, its hull still intact. Most of the wreckage had been torn apart by the explosion, but this container seemed to have survived. Zethkar activated his suit's thrusters and moved toward it. The pod was small, maybe 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. It looked like a standard shipping container, the kind humans use to store supplies or personal belongings. Zethkar ran his scanner over its surface. The readings were strange. There was definitely something inside, and it was giving off a weak energy signature. He found the access panel and worked on opening it. Human technology was primitive compared to Kragnath systems, but their locks could still be tricky. After a few minutes, the container hissed open. Emergency lights flickered on inside, casting a pale blue glow. Zethkar peered into the pod and stopped dead. Inside was something he had never expected to find. A makeshift cradle sat in the center of the container, surrounded by life support, equipment that hummed quietly. And in that cradle was a human baby. The infant was tiny, probably no more than 6 months old. He had pale skin and wispy brown hair. Most surprising of all, the baby was awake and looking directly at Zethkar with bright blue eyes. The child should have been terrified. Any normal creature would have screamed at the sight of a Kragnath warrior. But this little human just stared. With what looked like curiosity, Zethkar checked his readings again. The life support system was running on backup power and would fail within hours. Someone had built this shelter with great care, using every bit of technology they could find to keep the baby alive. There were feeding tubes, atmosphere recyclers, and even a small waste disposal system. Whoever had done this had loved this child very much. The baby made a soft sound and reached up with one tiny hand. Zethkar found himself leaning closer to get a better look. He had seen human infants before, but only in intelligence reports or battle footage, never this close. Never alive and looking at him like he was just another person instead of a monster. According to everything Zethkar had been taught, he should leave the child here. Humans were the enemy. They were weak and deserved whatever happened to them. His mission was to salvage technology, not rescue enemy survivors. The smart thing would be to take whatever useful equipment he could find and move on. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the baby looked at him without fear. Maybe it was the obvious love that had gone into building this survival. Shelter. Or maybe it was something deeper that Zethkar didn't want to admit to himself. He reached into the cradle with one armored hand. The baby immediately grabbed onto his finger with surprising strength. The tiny hand couldn't even wrap around the smallest part of Zethkar's finger, but the child held on tight. The baby made another soft sound, almost like he was trying to talk. Zethkar looked around the container more carefully. There were personal items scattered around. Pictures of humans smiling and holding the baby. A datapad with what looked like feeding schedules and medical information. And a small metal tag that read Jake Harrison, 6 months old, Daddy's little explorer, Jake. The baby had a name. It wasn't just another casualty of war. It was Jake, and someone had fought to keep him alive, even as their ship was dying around. The life support system beeped a warning. Power levels were dropping fast. In less than an hour, the air would run out and the tiny heater would fail. Jake would die alone in the cold darkness of space, just another victim of the endless war between humans and Kragnoth. Zethkar made a decision that went against everything he had been taught. He carefully lifted Jake from the cradle, supporting the baby's head like the medical data suggested. Jake didn't cry or struggle. Instead, he seemed fascinated by Zethkar's helmet and tried to touch it. With his free hand, the commander gathered up the essential supplies: baby food, bottles, medicine, and the datapad with care instructions. He also took the pictures, though he wasn't sure why. Something about the happy faces in those images seemed important. As he prepared to leave, Zethkar activated his emergency beacon. If any other human ships were in the area, they would investigate the signal. Maybe they could find other survivors, or recover bodies for proper burial. It was more mercy than the Kragnoth Empire usually showed, but it felt like the right thing to do. Jake made happy sounds as they flew back toward Zethkar's ship, the Iron Talon. The baby seemed to enjoy the movement, like it was all a game too. He had no idea that his entire world had been destroyed. To Jake, this was just another adventure with a new friend who happened to be 12 feet tall and covered in armor. The Iron Talon was a small but powerful vessel designed for deep space missions. Zethkar had modified it over the years to suit his needs. It had advanced medical equipment, powerful engines, and enough firepower to handle most threats. But it had never carried a human baby before. As soon as they were aboard, Zethkar sealed the ship and began working on the life support systems. Jake needed clean air, proper temperature, and the right atmospheric pressure. The ship's computer complained about the modifications, but Zethkar overrode its protests. He was the commander here, not some artificial intelligence. Jake watched everything with wide eyes. He didn't seem scared or upset about being on an alien ship. If anything, he appeared to be enjoying himself. When Zethkar removed his helmet, revealing the scarred face underneath, Jake just reached out to touch the strange new features. Zethkar's face was typical for his species: gray skin, yellow eyes, and sharp features that had been designed by evolution for intimidation. Most humans screamed when they saw a Kragnoth face. Jake just giggled and tried to grab Zethkar's nose. The warrior found himself smiling, something he hadn't done in years. There was something about this tiny human that was already changing him. Jake treated him like a protector instead of a monster. The baby trusted him completely, and that trust was both terrifying and wonderful. As the Iron Talon powered up and prepared to leave the debris field, Zethkar realized his life had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. He was now responsible for keeping Jake alive, and that meant going against everything his people believed in. The journey ahead would be dangerous. But looking down at the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms, Zethkar knew he had made the right choice. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons. Sometimes they were fought with compassion. The first night was the hardest. Jake woke up crying every few hours, and Zethkar had no idea what to do. The medical bay's artificial intelligence kept suggesting treatments that were designed for Kragnoth physiology, not human infants. Everything was too strong, too harsh, or completely wrong for a baby. Zethkar found himself pacing the ship's corridors at 3 a.m, holding Jake against his chest while the baby cried. His massive hands, designed for wielding weapons and crushing enemies, felt clumsy and dangerous around something so small and fragile. Every time Jake made a sound, Zethkar worried that he was doing something wrong. The datapad he had rescued from the container became his most valuable resource. It contained detailed instructions about feeding schedules, sleep patterns, and how to care for human babies. Zethkar studied it like battle plans, memorizing every detail. He learned about diaper changes, burping techniques, and the importance of keeping Jake at the right temperature. By the 3rd day, things started to get easier. Jake began to recognize Zethkar's voice and would stop crying when the big warrior spoke to him. The baby seemed fascinated by the low, rumbling sounds that Kragnoth voices made. Sometimes Jake would try to copy the sounds, making little growling noises that made Zethkar's heart skip a beat. The ship's food synthesizer had to be completely reprogrammed to make proper baby formula. Zethkar spent hours adjusting the nutrient levels and testing different combinations until he found something that Jake would actually eat. The baby was picky about flavors, making faces at anything that tasted wrong. Watching those tiny expressions of disgust and approval, Zethkar found himself laughing for the first time in years. Jake was a curious child. As soon as he was comfortable on the ship, he wanted to explore everything. His big blue eyes would track movement across the room, and he would reach for anything that caught his attention. Zethkar had 2 childproof areas of the ship that had never needed such considerations. Sharp edges were covered, small objects were moved out of reach, and security protocols were adjusted to account for tiny hands that might touch the wrong controls. The baby's sleep schedule was completely different from Kragnoth patterns. Jake needed frequent naps during the day and longer sleep periods at night. Zethkar found himself adjusting his own routine to match. He would work on ship maintenance while Jake slept, then spend the waking hours focused entirely on the babies. Needs communication was the most interesting challenge. Jake was starting to make more sounds, and Zethkar found himself talking to the child constantly. He would explain what he was doing as he worked around the ship, describe the stars they passed, or tell stories about places he had been. Jake would listen with serious attention, as if he understood every word. Slowly, Zethkar began teaching Jake simple words in the Kragnoth language, basic concepts like food, sleep, and safe. To his amazement, Jake seemed to pick up the sounds easily. The baby would babble back in what sounded like attempts to copy the alien words. When Jake successfully repeated a sound, Zethkar would praise him enthusiastically, which made the baby giggle with delight. The ship's computer recorded everything, creating a detailed log of Jake's development. Zethkar told himself it was just standard procedure, but really he wanted to remember every moment. The first time Jake smiled at him. The first time the baby fell asleep in his arms without crying. The first time Jake reached for him when he entered the room. 3 weeks into their journey, Jake began showing signs of teething. He was fussy and wanted to chew on everything he could reach. Zethkar fashioned safe teething toys from ship materials, making sure they were the right size and texture. He also discovered that Jake was soothed by the vibrations from the ship's engines. The baby would fall asleep quickly when placed near the humming machinery. The changes in Zethkar were just as dramatic as Jake's development. The hardened warrior found himself speaking in gentle tones he had never used before. His movements became more careful and precise. He started sleeping lighter, always alert for any sound from Jake's improvised nursery. His priorities shifted completely from military objectives to the simple goal of keeping one small human safe and happy. Other aspects of ship life had to be adapted to. Zethkar's exercise routines were modified so he could keep an eye on Jake, while staying in fighting shape. His weapon maintenance was done during nap times. Even his meditation periods, a crucial part of Kragnoth mental discipline, were adjusted to include Jake's presence. The baby brought out protective instincts that Zethkar didn't know he possessed. When the ship's sensors detected another vessel in the area, his first thought wasn't about potential threats to himself, but about keeping Jake safe. He found himself making tactical decisions based on what would be best for the baby, not what would be most advantageous for a Kragnoth warrior. Jake's personality began to emerge more clearly as the days passed. He was a happy child who smiled easily and rarely stayed upset for long. He was also incredibly social, always wanting attention and interaction. Zethkar would find himself making silly faces and sounds just to hear Jake laugh. The baby's joy was infectious, brightening even the darkest corners of the warrior's scarred heart. The data records from Jake's parents revealed more about his background. His father had been a terraforming engineer named Ben Harrison. His mother, Amy, had been a teacher specializing in early childhood development. They had been traveling to a new colony world to start fresh when the war caught up with them. The pictures showed a young family full of hope and dreams that had been cut short by violence. Reading about Jake's parents made Zethkar think about his own choices. He had spent his entire adult life following orders and fighting battles for the Kragnoth Empire. He had never questioned whether those battles were necessary or just. But now, holding an innocent child whose parents had died in one of those battles, He began to wonder if there might be a better way to live. The turning point came during Jake's 4th week aboard the ship. The baby had been fussy all day, refusing to eat and crying more than usual. Zethkar tried everything he could think of, but nothing seemed to help. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, he sat down in his command chair and held Jake close to his chest as they sat there together. Jake finally quieted down and looked up at Zethkar with those bright blue eyes. The baby reached up with one tiny hand and touched the warrior's face, right over a scar from an old battle. For a moment, they just looked at each other in complete understanding. In that instant, Zethkar realized that Jake wasn't just a responsibility he had taken on. The baby had become his family. This small human child trusted him completely, depended on him for everything, and gave him unconditional love in return. It was a bond stronger than anything he had ever experienced with his fellow Kragnoth. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying, because Zethkar knew that his people would never understand or accept what had happened between him and Jake. To the Kragnoth Empire, he was fraternizing with the enemy. If they found out about Jake, both of their lives would be in danger, but as Jake fell asleep in his arms, making those soft baby sounds that had become the most important thing in Zethkar's world, the warrior made a silent promise. He would protect this child no matter what it cost him, even if it meant standing against his own people, even if it meant becoming an outcast from everything he had ever known. Jake was his son now, and nothing in the universe would change that. The message from Kragnoth Command came 6 weeks after Zethkar had found Jake. The warrior was feeding the baby his morning meal when the communication system chirped with an incoming priority transmission. Jake was sitting in his high chair, a device Zethkar had built from spare ship parts, happily making a mess with his food and babbling in a mixture of human sounds and Kragnoth words. War Master Dakoth's scarred face appeared on the screen, his yellow eyes glowing with displeasure. He was Zethkar's direct superior and had never been known for patience or mercy. The old warrior's voice was cold and commanding when he spoke. Commander Zethkar, you have been absent from your assigned patrol sector for over a month. Your last report indicated completion of salvage operations in the human debris field. Explain your delay in returning to base. Zethkar felt his blood turn cold. Behind him, Jake continued babbling happily, unaware of the danger that had just entered their lives. The baby was trying to feed himself with a soft spoon, getting more food on his face than in his mouth. The sight would have made Zethkar smile any other time. War Master, I encountered complications during the salvage mission. My ship sustained damage that required extensive repairs. Zethkar lied smoothly. He had become good at deception over the past weeks, something that would have disgusted his former self. Dakoff's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Our sensor networks show no distress signals from your vessel. Your ship's automated systems report full operational status. What is the nature of these alleged complications? Jake chose that moment to bang his spoon on his tray, making loud, happy noises. The sound carried clearly through the ship's communication system. Dakoff's head tilted slightly, his predator instincts picking up on the unfamiliar noise. What was that sound? Commander Zethkar's mind raced. Emergency repairs to the atmospheric recycling system. The machinery is making unusual noises. I am working to resolve the issue. Submit a detailed repair log within the hour. You will return to base immediately upon completion of repairs. Command has new orders for you. Dakoff's image flickered and disappeared. Zethkar stood frozen for several moments, his worst fears beginning to come true. Jake noticed his guardian's distress and reached out with sticky fingers, making concerned baby sounds. The child had learned to read Zethkar's moods with surprising accuracy. There was no way to fake a repair log that would satisfy Dakoff's scrutiny. The War Master was suspicious by nature and would investigate any story that didn't add up. Worse, if Zethkar returned to base, Jake would be discovered within hours. The Kragnoth Empire had strict policies about enemy survivors, especially human children who might grow up to fight against them. That evening, as Jake slept peacefully in his crib, Zethkar made the hardest decision of his life. He accessed the Ships secured databases and began copying classified military information onto portable storage devices. Fleet positions, patrol routes, weapon specifications, and strategic plans. Information that would be incredibly valuable to human forces and devastating to the Kragnoth War effort. He was committing treason against his own people. The penalty would be death, not just for him, but for anyone who had helped him. Safety was more important than his loyalty to an empire that would murder an innocent child without hesitation. The next morning, Zethkar sent a message to Kragnoth Command. He reported that his ship had suffered a catastrophic engine failure and that he was abandoning vessel near the border territories. The message was designed to buy them time while throwing off pursuit. With luck, his former colleagues would waste days searching empty space for wreckage that didn't exist. Jake seemed to sense that something important was happening. The baby was more clingy than usual, wanting to be held constantly. He would watch Zethkar work with serious blue eyes, as if he understood that their quiet life together was about to change. 3 days later, while hiding in an asteroid field, near the neutral zone, Zethkar's sensors detected an approaching ship. It wasn't Kragnoth design, but it wasn't human either. The vessel was small and fast, built for smuggling and running blockades, exactly the kind of ship that operated in the lawless border regions. The ship's captain hailed them on an open frequency. Unknown vessel. This is the trading ship Wanderer's Dream. You're broadcasting a human distress signal. But your ship configuration is Kragnoth military. That's an interesting combination. Mind explaining? Zethkar hesitated, revealing himself. 2 strangers was dangerous, but they needed help to reach human space. This is Commander Zethkar of the Iron Talon. I am transporting a human refugee to safety. I request passage through this sector. There was a long pause before the reply came. Did you just say a Kragnoth commander is helping a human? That's either the best lie I've heard this year or the most interesting truth. Either way, I'm curious. Prepare to be boarded? The Wanderer's Dream docked with the Iron Talon an hour later. Zethkar waited in his ship's main corridor, holding Jake in his arms. The baby was fascinated by all the new activity, looking around with bright curiosity. When the airlock opened, a woman stepped through wearing a pilot's jacket and carrying a blaster. She was human, probably in her 30s, with short dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. Her name was Lisa Martinez, and she had clearly seen plenty of trouble in the border regions. She stopped dead when she saw Zethkar holding Jake, her weapon half raised in surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered. "You really are a Kragnoth." With a human baby, you chose that moment to wave at the newcomer and make one of his happy babbling sounds. Lisa's expression softened immediately, the maternal instinct overriding her wariness. She holstered her weapon and approached carefully. "How old is he?" "Approximately 8 months now. His name is Jake." Zethkar found himself speaking in the gentle tone he used with the baby, not his usual military bark. Lisa studied them both. With practiced eyes, she had spent years reading people in dangerous situations, and something about this unlikely pair convinced her they were genuine. "You said refugee? What happened to his parents?" "They died when their colony ship was destroyed. I found Jake in the wreckage." Zethkar decided to stick as close to the truth as possible. "And you decided to save him instead of leaving him to die." "That's not exactly standard Kragnoth behavior." Lisa held out her hand to Jake, who immediately tried to grab her fingers. "Hey there, little guy. You've got an interesting bodyguard." Over the next few hours, Lisa heard the full story of how Zethkar and Jake had found each other. She was amazed by the bond between them and the changes it had created in the Kragnoth warrior. Jake clearly adored his alien guardian, and Zethkar was completely devoted to the child's well-being. "You know there's a massive bounty on your head by now," Lisa told him. "The Kragnoth Empire doesn't take desertion lightly, especially from someone of your rank. I am aware of the consequences. Jake's safety is more important than my own survival." Lisa made her decision. "I know people in human space who help refugees and displaced families, but it's a dangerous journey, and we'll be hunted every step of the way. Both our peoples have plenty of reasons to shoot first and ask questions later. I understand the risks. I hope you do. Because once we start this journey, there's no going back. You'll be an enemy of your own people forever. Zethkar looked down at Jake, who was playing with a small toy Zethkar had made for him. The baby looked up and smiled, reaching for his guardian's face with complete trust. In that moment, Zethkar knew he had already made his choice weeks ago. Jake is my family now. I will do whatever it takes to give him a safe life. Lisa nodded slowly. Then we'd better make sure we all survive long enough to get him to safety. Welcome aboard the most dangerous road trip in the galaxy. The journey to Haven Station took 3 weeks through the most dangerous space routes in the galaxy. Lisa's ship, the Wanderer's Dream, was fast but cramped with 3 people and a growing toddler aboard. Jake was now walking with unsteady steps and getting into everything he could reach. His curiosity had only grown stronger. He treated the cramped smuggling vessel like his personal playground. Zethkar found himself constantly worried about Jake's safety in the small ship. The child had no fear and would try to climb on anything. That caught his interest. Lisa had to install safety barriers around the engine room after Jake managed to toddle in there while she was making repairs. The toddler was fascinated by the glowing panels and spinning machinery. He's going to be an engineer like his father, Lisa said, watching Jake examine a control panel with serious concentration. Look how he studies everything. He's trying to figure out how it all works. Jake had learned to walk during their journey, taking his first steps while holding onto Zethkar's massive hand. The warrior had been so proud that he recorded the moment on his personal data files. Now the toddler was everywhere, exploring every corner of the ship with boundless energy. The most amazing thing was how Jake communicated. He had picked up more Kragnoth words from Zethkar and was learning human phrases from Lisa. The child would switch between languages without thinking about it, sometimes mixing them together in ways that made perfect sense to him but confused the adults. "Ship go fast," Jake would say in human words, then add Vethkorlak, which meant very good in Kragnoth. Used whatever words came to him first, creating his own unique language that combined both cultures. Lisa was amazed by Jake's development. I've never seen a kid learn languages this quickly. Most children his age barely have a dozen words. He's already using complex sentences in 2 completely different languages. They had several close calls with patrol ships during the journey. Twice they were forced to hide in asteroid fields while Kragnoth hunters passed nearby. Once a human. Military vessels stopped them for inspection, but Lisa's smuggling credentials got them through without too much trouble. The inspector never looked closely enough to realize that Zethkar wasn't just another alien trader. Jake seemed to enjoy the adventure. He would watch the stars go by through the ship's viewports, pointing at bright objects and asking questions in his mixed-up language. "What that shiny thing?" he would ask, or Korvac's stellar bright, which was his way of mixing human and Kragnoth words for the same question. The toddler had also learned to read moods very well. When the adults were tense during dangerous encounters, Jake would become quieter and more well-behaved. When they were relaxed and happy, he would be more playful and energetic. It was like he understood that his behavior could affect their safety. During the long hours of travel, Lisa learned more about Kragnoth culture from Zethkar. She was surprised to discover that his people had their own version of family bonds, though they were very different from human relationships. Kragnoth warriors formed battle-brother connections with their comrades. But these were based on mutual respect and shared combat experience rather than emotional attachment. What you have with Jake is completely unknown to us, Zethkar explained. During one of their conversations, we are taught that emotional bonds make warriors weak. But Jake has made me stronger, not weaker. He has given me something worth fighting for beyond just following orders. Lisa could see the truth in his words. Zethkar was more alert and determined than any warrior she had ever encountered. His protective instincts had been sharpened too, a razor's edge by his love for Jake. He would notice potential threats before they became dangerous, and was constantly planning escape routes and defensive positions. As they approached Haven Station, Lisa began preparing them for what to expect. The station was a neutral meeting place where dozens of different species traded goods and information. It was also home to refugees from various conflicts, including many humans who had lost their homes to the war. The station has its own security force, but they're more interested in keeping the peace than asking difficult questions, Lisa explained. As long as we don't cause trouble, they'll leave us alone. But there are always bounty hunters and information brokers around. We need to be careful who we trust. Jake was excited by the prospect of meeting new people. He had spent most of his life with just Zethkar, and then Lisa had joined them. The idea of a place with lots of different beings was fascinating to him. He kept asking questions about what they would see and do at the station. Haven Station was massive, a spinning wheel of metal and lights that housed over 1 million beings from across the galaxy. As they approached the docking bay, Jake pressed his face against the viewport and stared in wonder at the huge structure. "Big place," he whispered in awe. The docking procedures were routine, but Zethkar felt nervous as they prepared to leave the ship. This would be the first time he and Jake had been around large groups of people since they had started their journey together. There were so many things that could go wrong. Lisa had arranged for them to meet with Dr. Carl Roberts, human scientist who studied relationships between different species. She thought he might be able to help them understand what made Jake so special. Dr. Roberts had been fascinated by her description of a human child raised by a Kragnoth warrior. The meeting took place in a quiet restaurant in the station's civilian section. Dr. Roberts was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying hair. He was clearly nervous about meeting a Kragnoth warrior, but his scientific curiosity overcame his fear when he saw Jake. The toddler was on his best behavior, sitting in a high chair between Zethkar and Lisa. He studied Dr. Roberts with bright blue eyes, then surprised everyone by greeting him in perfect Kragnoth. "Veth Korlak, scholar human," Jake said, which roughly translated to very good human teacher. Dr. Roberts nearly dropped his drink. "Did he just greet me formally in Kragnoth? How old did you say he was?" 18 months, Zethkar replied. Proudly, he learns very quickly. Over the next hour, Dr. Roberts observed Jake's behavior and language skills. The child switched effortlessly between human and Kragnoth concepts, often using the most precise word from either language to express what he wanted to say. He showed no fear of anyone and seemed genuinely interested in making friends with the doctor. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Roberts said finally. Jake's brain development has been shaped by constant exposure to two completely different ways of thinking. Most children learn one cultural perspective first, then have to adapt to others later. Jake has been absorbing both human and Kragnoth worldviews simultaneously. He explained that Jake's unique upbringing had created neural pathways that allowed him to understand different species' perspectives intuitively. The child could sense emotions and intentions across cultural barriers that normally took years of study to bridge. "He's like a living translator between species," Dr. Roberts continued. "Not just for languages, but for entire ways of thinking." Jake can understand why humans in Kragnoth act the way they do because he's been raised to see both perspectives as equally valid. As if to prove the point, Jake noticed that Dr. Roberts was getting tired and offered him a drink from his own cup. It was a gesture of care that combined human nurturing instincts with Kragnoth concepts of sharing resources with allies. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Roberts said quietly. "If other children could be raised this way, we might finally have a path to real peace between species." Jake isn't just a remarkable child. He might be the key to ending the war. Even as they talked about Jake's amazing abilities, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the restaurant. A bounty hunter had recognized Zethkar and was already sending messages to very dangerous people. The alarm bells started ringing across Haven Station at exactly 1400 hours. Jake was playing with toy blocks in their temporary quarters when the sound filled the air. The toddler looked up with wide eyes, not understanding what the noise meant but sensing the fear it brought to the adults around him. Zethkar's military training kicked in immediately. He scooped Jake into his arms and checked his weapons while Lisa grabbed their emergency supplies. Through the small window, they could see massive Kragnoth warships approaching the station. The fleet was led by the dreadnought Bonecrusher, a ship Zethkar recognized all too well. "That's War Master Vextel Est flagship," Zethkar said grimly. "He was my mentor when I was young." If he's here personally, they're not planning to take prisoners. The station's communication system crackled to life. A cold, Kragnoth voice filled every speaker on Haven Station. Attention all inhabitants. We seek the traitor Zethkar and his human accomplice. Surrender them within 1 hour or this station will be destroyed. You have been warned. Panic spread through the station like wildfire. Thousands of beings rushed toward escape pods and docked ships, desperate to flee before the deadline. But the Kragnoth fleet had surrounded Haven Station completely. No one was getting out alive unless Zethkar surrendered. Jake clung to Zethkar's neck, frightened by all the noise and chaos around them. The child kept asking, "What wrong?" in his mixed language, not understanding why everyone was so scared. Zethkar held him close, his heart breaking at the thought of what he had to do. "I have to give myself up," Zethkar told Lisa. "It's the only way to save everyone on this station." "Like hell you will," Lisa shot back. "There has to be another way." But they all knew there wasn't. The Kragnoth Empire never made empty threats. If Zethkar didn't surrender, thousands of innocent people would die. Dr. Roberts had joined them in their quarters, and even he couldn't think of a solution that would save everyone. Jake seemed to understand that something very bad was happening. The normally cheerful toddler became quiet and serious. He looked back and forth between the adults, studying their faces with those bright blue eyes that missed nothing. Then Jake did something that surprised everyone. He wiggled out of Zethkar's arms and walked to the center of the room. The child looked up at the adults and said very clearly, "Jake, go talk." "What do you mean, little one?" Zethkar asked, kneeling down to Jake's level. Jake pointed toward the docking bay where the Kragnoth boarding shuttles would arrive. Jake talked to sad warriors. Make them not sad anymore. The adults exchanged worried looks. Jake was too young to understand the danger, but something in his voice made them listen. Dr. Roberts had said that Jake could bridge cultural gaps in ways that no one else could. Maybe the child sensed something they were missing. "It's too dangerous," Lisa said. "They're not just sad warriors, Jake. They're here to hurt people." But Jake shook his head with the stubborn determination that only toddlers could manage. "Warriors. Not bad. Warriors scared. Jake, not scared of warriors." 20 minutes before the deadline, Zethkar made a decision that went against every protective instinct he had. It would take Jake to meet the Kragnoth boarding party. Not to surrender, but to let his son try to do what no diplomat or negotiator had ever managed. Maybe Jake really could reach the hearts of warriors who had forgotten they had hearts. They walked through the station's corridors toward the main docking bay. Word had spread quickly about what they were planning. Hundreds of beings lined the hallways, watching the unlikely trio with mixtures of hope and terror. Some were crying. Others were praying to whatever gods they believed in. Jake walked between Zethkar and Lisa, holding both their hands. The toddler wasn't afraid at all. If anything, he seemed excited about meeting new people. He kept asking questions about Kragnoth, culture, and what the warriors would be like. The docking bay was huge, with dozens of ship berths and cargo areas. Most of the normal activity had stopped, leaving the space eerily quiet, except for the emergency alarms. At the far end, a massive Kragnoth's assault shuttle was docking. Through the reinforced windows, they could see armored warriors preparing to board the station. War-Master Vextel led the boarding party personally. He was even larger than Zethkar, with scars covering his armor from decades of battle. His yellow eyes glowed with cold anger as he searched for his former student. Behind him came 20 elite warriors, all armed for war. Zethkar stepped forward, still holding Jake's hand. "War Master, Vextel, I am here." The old warrior stopped and stared at Zethkar with a mixture of disappointment and rage. "So the great Commander Zethkar has fallen so far that he hides behind civilians and children. I trained you better than this, student." "You trained me to be a warrior," Zethkar replied. "But Jake taught me to be something more." Vextel's gaze dropped to the small human child standing calmly beside Zethkar. The War Master had expected to find a terrified prisoner, or perhaps a human weapon. Instead, he saw a toddler looking up at him with curious blue eyes and no trace of fear. Jake let go of Zethkar's hand and walked toward the massive Kragnoth warriors. Every weapon in the room tracked his movement, but the child paid no attention to the danger. He stopped in front of Vexel and looked up at the War Master's scarred face. "Hello, big warrior," Jake said in perfect Kragnoth. "Why are you so sad?" "Jake, make you feel better?" Vexel stared down at the child in complete shock. In all his years of war and conquest, no one had ever asked him if he was sad. The question hit him like a physical blow, cutting through layers of military conditioning. "In emotional armor?" "You are the human child that corrupted my student," Vexel said, his voice less certain than before. Jake tilted his head thoughtfully. Jake not corrupt anyone. Jake loved Papa Zeth. Papa Zeth loved Jake. Love make people happy, not bad. Simple words carried more power than any weapon. Several of the Kragnoth warriors shifted uncomfortably, their hands moving away from their guns. Jake's innocent honesty was something none of them had encountered before. "Papa Zeth, tell Jake about warrior honor," the toddler continued, "about protecting family and fighting for good things. You teach Papa Zeth to be strong warrior. Now Papa Zeth teach Jake to be strong too. Jake want to learn about honor from teacher of Papa Zeth." Vexel found himself kneeling down to get closer to Jake's level. The child reached out and touched the War Master's armored hand with tiny fingers. Where Jake touched, old memories surfaced. Memories of why Vexel had become a warrior in the first place. To protect his people, to serve something greater than himself. "Do you?" "To sense that you're," Vexta asked quietly. "Honor means keeping promises to family. Honor means protecting people who cannot protect themselves. Honor means being kind to everyone, even when they are different." Jake replied solemnly. The child's words echoed through the docking bay. Other Kragnoth warriors found themselves remembering their own families, their own reasons for fighting. Jake's presence was affecting all of them, breaking down the wall of hatred they had built around their hearts. Slowly, one by one, the Kragnoth warriors lowered their weapons. They were still soldiers, still dangerous, but Jake had reminded them that they were also people. People who had once had hopes and dreams beyond endless war. Vexel stood up and looked at Zethkar with new understanding. "Your son has shown me something I had forgotten, old student. Perhaps there is more than one way to be strong." The War Master turned to his warriors and spoke in a voice that carried across the docking bay. "We return to the fleet. There will be no bloodshed here today." As the Kragnoth forces withdrew, Jake waved goodbye to each warrior personally. "Come visit Jake again," he called out cheerfully. "Jake teach you more about being happy." Years later, Haven Station became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. The place where a human toddler had stopped a war with nothing but love and curiosity. Jake grew up to become a bridge between species, helping former enemies learn to live in peace, and Zethkar watched it all with pride, knowing that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who choose love over hate, hope over fear, and family over everything else.